Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to talk about Unleash the Night by Sherrilyn Kenyon. Well, Sherrilyn McQueen. Sherrilyn Kenyon, or Kenyon was her last name beforehand, but now she's back to her maiden name, McQueen. So going forward, I'm going to refer to her as Sherrilyn McQueen. So yeah, as usual, we're going to talk a little bit of non-spoilery thoughts and opinions up front, then we're going to move over to spoilers where we can talk in more detail. So as always, please make sure you hit that like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. And let's begin. Unleash the Night. Unleash the Night is a part of Sherrilyn Kenyon's huge catalog of books. It is under one of the multiple umbrellas that she has, but this book falls under the umbrella of the Werehunters. So this story kind of requires a bit of exposition background before I can even explain anything that happens in the story. And I consider this to be non-spoiler because it's honestly expositional setup for her entire book series. So it's relevant to any Sherrilyn McQueen stuff that I'll talk about on the channel. So, yeah, let's just go ahead and start off with that. And I'll pretty much count that as my non-spoilery part because the rest of the book is really just, it's so simple that it's kind of hard for me to talk about without talking about the main plot towards the end. So, yeah, let's just jump right into it. So, in the world that Sherrilyn Kenyon has created, in the universe that she has created, all the ancient gods are real. So every pantheon from every culture that has ever existed is real. And similar to the way countries will rise and fall, these pantheons have risen and fallen and stuff. So over the years, all the way from the Sumerians all the way up to the Christians and stuff, all of these gods and mythological creatures within their sect or whatever is real. So all the Greeks are real, the Atlantean gods are real, so Atlantis was real, all the Sumerian gods are real, the Egyptian gods, all of them are real. So just like the cultures themselves, just like the countries that, created these gods and stuff, just like the way they would war, the gods would end up warring. So, and most of this took place before humans even came about. So, through all the warring between the different pantheons, something basically had to be done about it because each of these gods holds, at least to some degree, primal control over a universal aspect. So, like Apollo and Artemis, to a degree, they hold the power of the sun and the moon. If they were killed, then that would have catastrophic ramifications for the universe itself. So, as a result, the situation when, those kind of gods fight each other between pantheons, like one sun god from one pantheon fights a sun god from another one, like it could have catastrophic ramifications on the planet. So there were these creatures called Chthonians that were eventually created. They're essentially the police force for the gods. So they pretty much regulate any fights and all that stuff going on. They deal with the bickering and tell everybody to shut up, basically. But when necessary, they can kill a god. They are the only creature that is capable of killing a god without causing universal ramifications. They do what is called sending the power of that god back to the source. Because all of the power of all the gods and all the demons and all these kind of creatures from every mythology, all of them draw their power to some degree from the primal source. So there is no one single god or anything. There's just a primal source of universal energy that basically spewed out all of this stuff. So a Chthonian is basically a police force between the gods. So they're just as strong as gods, but they don't have the limitation of being stuck to a pantheon or a culture or anything like that. They're basically humans with godlike power that are capable of killing gods. But so all of that's kind of one of the big umbrella setups, right? So apart from that, all the ancient mythologies of these cultures and stuff are real. So we have the real life mythology of a werewolf, which a lot of people believe started with the ancient Greek king Kenyon, who basically, as a result of doing some really disrespectful stuff and kind of insulting the gods, was basically made to eat his children, I believe, to eat their flesh and become like an animal. No, he served guests human food or something, or human as food, and the gods punished him by making him actually eat flesh or something like that. Basically, it evolved the mythology of the werewolf. So in this series, though, the king Kenyon, instead of doing that, he married a woman who was an Apolite, and the Apolites are an entire separate race of humans. They kind of are humans, but they're not technically humans. They're Apolites. So one day, long, long ago, Apollo was talking crap to Zeus and said, "I can create life better than than you. I can do a better job at creating life because you made all these varieties of people and they all are boring or whatever. So Apollo made what is basically Aryans. He made an Aryan race. When I realized that, I could not think about it. So he made a bunch of over 6 foot tall blonde people that are all like tall and statuesque and all this stuff, and they all have psychic powers. And he specifically basically modeled them after him because Apollo was described as being blonde and, you know, sunlight and all that kind of stuff. So he basically created this entire race of people, but it didn't really work out that well, and he was kind of a very lazy kind of god in a lot of ways, so he wasn't really shepherding them a lot. So one day, eventually, his human consort was killed at the age of 27. So as a result of that, he cursed the entire race of Apollites to die on their 27th birthday in the similar way that she died. So as a result, basically, he pushed all of the rest of the Apollites that didn't get killed, that were left, he pushed them to Atlantis. So they essentially became the Atlanteans, right? But then we go back to King Lycaon. So King Lycaon married one of these Apollites, and he finds out on her 27th birthday that she was to die. So when she died, he realized his kids, because they had already had 2 kids together, that they were also going to die on their 27th birthday because they shared blood with their mom. So he was trying to figure out how to do something about it. And King Lycaon was also a sorcerer. So he spliced together magic and like science and all this kind of stuff that he could figure out. And he eventually turned his 2 sons into 4 creatures. He turned 2 of his sons are, it's not really broken down properly how it happened, but his 2 sons became 4 creatures. They're basically were creatures. So it's not just werewolves, but there are bears and hawks and all kinds of creatures and stuff. But he essentially made 2 breeds. There are the Arcadians, who are humans that can turn into wolves or into animals. So those are your typical were people, like a werewolf or werebear or anything like that. A human that can turn into an animal. But then there is also those animals that he used to splice their magic or whatever the hell he did to create the new species that he did. It turned those animals into creatures similar to them. So the wolf and I believe like a hawk or something was the 2 he used for his sons or something. They both are still animals, but they have now the capability to become human. So they will be a wolf were instead of werewolf. So it's just, you know, back and forth kind of thing. So, but they became known as Arcadian and Catagaria. Arcadians have a human heart and have a base form of human, whereas Catagaria have a animal heart and a base form of an animal. So that is basically how we set up everything. And one of those Thonians, one of the last ones that was left over, is basically assigned to be the judge, jury, and executioner and mediator between these people. Because King Lycaon basically went against the will of the gods and the fates in order to do this, because they were cursed to die at 27. He kind of circumvented that curse. He was punished by the gods for his hubris, but his children were punished. So the 2 type of races that was created, they were now destined to never be able to fall in love by their own will. They basically, all their choices are made by fate. They'll get a mating mark and like, that's the person you have to be with, or your stuff don't work, basically. And apart from that, they are bound to always be at war with each other. So they're always fighting. So the werewolves and the wolf wares are always trying to kill each other. So Savitar, one of the last Thonians, is the only person that basically mediates between the species. He's their big boss. And he has, over the years, has let out these licenses for a neutral ground location called a Lamani. So basically, there's all these creatures running around, and this is just one. It's so hilariously overly complicated. This is just explaining one of the areas of the mythology of her world. So, but this background and all this exposition stuff is incredibly necessary to even step into the context of the world for it to make any sort of sense. So we basically have werewolves and wolf wares and bears and all these kind of creatures all living unseen in New Orleans. So, if any of that exposition made sense, and if you were able to follow along, then that's basically where we pick up in our main story. So, the story centers around a couple, Wren and Maggie. And Wren is a tigard. He's a tigard. I like that better because it sounds better than Tigger. Like, because it just sounds like Tigger. But, so he's a tiger. He is a half snow leopard and half tiger, half white tiger. And that is very frowned upon. Like, mixing species like that is very unheard of. But because the animals don't really have a choice, because their mating mark, like whoever they sleep with, if they get a mating mark, then that's who they can only have kids with and all that kind of stuff. So it was a whole situation that created his birth. But as a result of his being a mixed breed the way he is, he deals with a lot of prejudice and a lot of hatred from all kinds of people, from the Arcadians and from the Catagaria, from all kinds of different animal species, from everyone. So he just has like a real rough go of it. And after a huge situation happened where his parents were killed, and like there's a mystery around it whether or not he had something to do with it or not. But after that event happened, Savitar brought him to this bar called Sanctuary, which is one of their Lamanis, which is a neutral ground place where anybody can go and be safe. So he basically sent him there to try to grow up because he was a little kid at the time when all this happened. So we then basically jump forward in time after he's been there for some years. He's very quiet and very, reserved and stuff, and doesn't really speak to anybody, and like grows his hair out in such a way where it's all over his face. So just to try to hide from people. Something clearly happened with the issue with his parents that caused so much trauma that he desperately tries to remain invisible. So he's basically just waiting tables at this bar, trying to be like a normal guy or whatever, doing this thing. And he ends up waiting on this table full of these very snobby, uppity, rich people. These college kids or whatever, who are very uppity, and they give him a whole bunch of crap. And they like pour drinks on his head and stuff like that. And the other people in the bar is ran by a family of bear wearers. They are Catagaria. Their base form is bears, but they are, they go back and forth. So they all basically run the bar. So they come up and basically help him out and basically get him out of the dining area before he loses his mind and transforms and attacks these people. So they basically get him out of the situation and kick all those people out the bar. But one of the people that was at the table, Maggie, she's the daughter of a very illustrious senator and everything. So she's got this upper crust high society thing that she does not like. She hates it, and she hates having to basically play this part of this spoiled little rich girl and stuff, because that's what her dad expects of her. So, but she is very much a New Orleans girl. She's very much a Cajun, as they call themselves. That's the common thing, Cajuns. Like, she is very much that. So it's very much, she hates all of this kind of stuff that's around her. She hates the way these people behave and how they treat other people and stuff, but she just feels so obligated. So out of the shame and embarrassment of what they did, she goes back to apologize to Rand and to apologize to the other people at the bar and stuff. And that basically sets off the whole thing for their romance, for their whole interaction between each other. So after this, I'm going to basically go ahead and jump into spoilers, because all that exposition took a while as it is. So I'm basically going to I'm going to skim over some of the other stuff and jump into the stuff that I think is really cool about this book. So yeah, if you haven't read it, I really do suggest it. If you are into really expansive, interesting world building, you can pretty much pick up anything from Sherrilyn McQueen, sorry, and it will be interesting. Like, it just is. Just the world and universe she sets her stuff in is just so good. Like, I can't gush about it enough. I really can't. And this is the month of February, the month of love, so you might as well read something with a simple little love story in there. So yeah, let's go ahead and jump over to spoilers so I can talk about a little bit more of this. So, Ren and Maggie is interesting because the Sherrilyn King always kind of wraps her stories around the simple will they, won't they. Almost a very Romeo and Juliet kind of love story situation. So, it's always they're not supposed to be together, but they can't help but be together. And then there's even internal logic within the world that explains why that happens. So after a few more interactions, of course, Maggie and Ren started to feel each other. They started to like each other and stuff. And she's kind of able to bring some of this personality out of him that like very few other people can and stuff. And like, so they kind of just start their romance and they start to just kind of go. And they actually end up sleeping together like multiple times, but they never actually get a mating mark. So they assume that they're not mates. They're not destined to be together, which also is something that feels like a cruel twist of fate because they actually do like each other. They do legitimately fall in love, but they're not mates. So that's another thing of the fates kind of screwing them over. Like, you're not allowed to be with the person that you're in love with. Another person that is going to, be your actual mate or whatever, that's who you're supposed to be with. But in my head, there's an easy workaround. Like with them two, if they just never cheat on each other, never sleep with anybody else, they will never get mated to anybody else, and they can just be together like normal people. Like, so that just seems like a very simple workaround to me. But whatever. So that's kind of a solid chunk of the story. But I think one of the most interesting things about Unleashed Tonight is, while Sherrilyn McQueen, previously Sherrilyn Kenyon, like, while a lot of her stuff has major crossover, because pretty much all her books take place in the same city. They're all really in New Orleans. So in any given scene, in any given book, any background character, there might be an entire book about that character, and there's this entire extensive background about them. So that happens so much in this. And then there's like a degree that it kind of gets stepped up in this one. So this book has direct crossover with Bad Moon Rising and Night Play and Night Play. So it's really interesting the way a lot of the events are happening, but then it's like another book's events are happening at the same time. And when you read them all together, you can kind of pick all the different pieces, and it kind of tells this overall story of the place Sanctuary. So that's one of the structural things that Sherrilyn does that I think is really interesting. A lot of times it can become really confusing, especially if you read them very much out of order, or out of event order more so than publication order. It kind of can become incredibly confusing. So that has to be one of my favorite parts. But the entire story is itself basically a murder mystery plot. So it is later on discovered that Ren's parents were killed, and it is suspected that he has something to do with it, because a cousin of his on the leopard side, or no, on the tiger side, I believe, basically wants his money. Because one of his parents was Katagarian and the other was Arcadian, I believe, and they're rich. Like, he is incredibly, incredibly rich. So the Arcadians are trying to basically get him killed by blaming him for the murder of his parents in order for them to be next in line to inherit all the money from his dad's company, like Targaryen Industries or something, I believe it's called. And he's just like insanely rich. So and then becomes like a whole plot about how animals don't kill for money. Animals wouldn't do that. So it's definitely his Arcadian family members, the humans, that would do that, because that's such a human thing to do. So it's an interesting plot that kind of builds up and kind of plays out here. But the only way to prove Ren's innocent and to kind of rescind the kill order that has been put out on him is to basically prove that he didn't kill his parents. And nobody believes that he didn't kill his parents except for one of the bears at the sanctuary, Lamani, Amy. Because she knows him, she saw him when he first came in, and she likes him and stuff. She thinks he's a cool kid and everything. So, and she has different abilities that basically tells her that he definitely didn't do it. So she knows for a fact that he's innocent. And basically the whole thing is him running around while also being in love with Maggie, trying to deal with the fact that she's human, he's not. He's got a bunch of people coming after him and stuff. And it just kind of culminates in this cool kind of murder mystery thing. But some of the things that I do kind of have to criticize this book for, later on, I think this has to be one of Sherrilyn's earlier ones, because later on she doesn't need to do anything like this. So she essentially ends up writing herself into a corner. The only way out of the situation becomes basically unprovable in a satisfying way. So the only way to know about it is to actually go to the event. So it feels like a extra writing. It's been mentioned before that this is possible. So because of the Acolytes having had major psychic powers from Apollo, and then using extra magic to turn them into these creatures, these werehunters have a lot of powers. They have probably just generic full-on magic. Some have more specialty in some type of magic, and some have specialty in other things, but they can all teleport and conjure clothes and shoot bolts of energy and all kinds of stuff, right? So, but one of the things that she kind of introduces in this story is on the full moon, they have the ability to go back in time. All werehunters are that powerful and they can technically do that, but it is so, it's such a no-no that nobody does it. So this, of course, ends up being the final solution to figuring out who actually killed Ren's parents. And they end up doing it. They go back in time. Ren and Maggie go back in time, and they find out that Ren was involved, but he did not kill his parents. It was a battle between the two of them. They basically fought each other to death and killed each other. And there's that's when all the Arcadians and all that stuff, all of that kind of stuff started kind of turning into a plan to basically screw him over. So it's kind of a really cool, kind of simple explanation. To me, of all the ones that I've read so far, I think this one is it wraps up really neatly, but it's kind of tainted because, as I said, it feels like a necessary plot device to just pull that time travel out in order to make it resolvable. She accidentally wrote herself into a corner. But I kind of like the way it shows all this other stuff about the werehunter universe and everything, especially if you're unfamiliar with it, because you start to learn just so much more about the way they work and stuff, especially in consideration of the fact that Ren is of two two different types of cats. So like you learn that like that kind of union is so super forbidden, like it is considered disgusting and terrible and all this stuff. Like there's already a stigma against an Arcadian and a Categoria being together, but then an Arcadian of one species and a Categoria of another species getting together, that's like, oh hell no. Like, so everybody's losing their mind about it. So there's just a lot of fun little nuggets and stuff like that. I really like these books from the perspective of the world building and all the extensive lore and stuff. The actual love story itself is always kind of okay. It's always mid-level. There's never an incredibly epic one. There's one story that I found more epic because the main character goes through so much more terrible stuff. But in general, I think this is like a great baseline for her books, as far as the Were Hunters at least. The Dark Hunters is a whole other story, and I'm gonna probably have to give 10 minutes of exposition before I talk about one of those stories too. So yeah. But essentially, the way the story really wraps up is they find out Ren's parents, he didn't kill his parents, he's innocent, and he basically inherits all the money from his company. He's rich and all this stuff, and they have to go deal with the fact that Maggie's dad hates him. He just thinks that Ren is just a bus boy. I mean, obviously he doesn't know that he's supernatural and everything, but he just thinks he's like a bus boy and he's not worthy of his daughter and everything. So they basically show up in the last little bit of the book. He's like, oh, he inherited all of Targaryen Industries or whatever. Like, he's a multi-billionaire. Like, he's richer than we are and stuff. And then her dad's tune changes immediately. I'm like, oh, okay. It's like, it's one of those things. But as a result of like all the kill order and stuff that went on, I don't know what that beeping is if y'all hear it, but it's really annoying me. But basically, as a result of like the kill order and everything like that, Savitar decides to kind of do them a favor. Through this entire time, they've been sleeping together, they've been dating, they're in love, they've been fighting back and forth. Like her mother attacked him and all this stuff. Oh wait, before I talk about the last thing, like they've been going through all kinds of stuff. So in the past, this is another thing Sherrilyn did that I think it's never mentioned before or since. Nothing like this ever happens again. So it feels a lot like pulled it right out her ass just to make it work. Because I think at this time she was still thinking about the fact that Were Hunters could only be like with Were Hunters or whatever. So she created a situation where in dying, his dad, I believe it was his dad, not the mom, his dad gave his Were Hunter nature to Maggie. So she was then able to become a Were Hunter and transform into a leopard, which makes no sense by the logic that she puts in the rest of the stories and stuff. It makes no sense. And there's also other scenarios where a Were Hunter is with a human. So there's scenarios where it just works out. Like there's no need for the human to become a supernatural creature. I think this is because this was one of her first ones doing with the Were Hunters. She didn't have it all, locked down too much immediately. So maybe that's the result of it. But it's something that I kind of noticed. I'm like, it would have been cool if she stayed human and stuff. But I'm also like, if I was in that scenario, I would want to become a supernatural creature. Make me a werewolf, a werebear, anything like that. I'll be all about it. So I can't really blame her for it. But ultimately, the whole solution ends with them still having not been mated. Even after she gets turned into a Were Hunter, like they still don't mate. So Savitar, being God level powerful, he literally gives them mating marks. He makes them mates and basically says, oh, the fates can kiss my ass. As a result, like, because he's just that powerful, like the fates can literally go yell at him and he's like, okay, and he can completely ignore them. So he literally gives them a mating mark, allows them to be together. So you end up in this situation of they will never be together, they can't be together, the worlds are keeping them apart and all this stuff, but it ends up in this perfect, happy little ending and all this stuff. But of course, there's a lot of threads that are left because so much of this story tacks on and ties to other stories and stuff. And, all of these characters are very continuous. Like, they all will show up in other books, other storylines and stuff. So it has so much of a life of its own. So it just continues to go. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up because this review is already pretty long considering all that exposition I had to dump. But yeah, if you've read any of Sherrilyn, McQueen / Kenyon stuff, let me know about that in the comments down below. What do y'all think of Unleash the Night? I thought it was really, really good. It was one of my first Sherrilyn stories I read, and it really set me off on this whole trajectory of her stuff for like a good period of time. So yeah, let me know about that in the comments down below. Make sure you hit that like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already, and I will talk to y'all next time. Peace.